Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio, part of your SB Nation family of podcasts. If you're listening on our podcast network, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe there as well. Today I have Tom Radowski, former Giants scouting assistant, with me to talk about a few Giants related issues as we begin to really look forward to training camp, having turned the corner from the 4th of July. So Tom, thanks for hopping on and doing this with me again.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So one of the things that you do these days is write for 33rd Team, a publication that I happen to like very, very much. Mike Tannenbaum, Joe Banner, lots of former NFL execs, really smart NFL people. And you penned a piece the other day at 33rd Team really about Saquon Barkley and about what you hope Brian Daboll's impact on Saquon Barkley will be. If people haven't read that, why don't you just talk a little bit about the piece that you did and basically, summarize your thoughts on that relationship.
Yeah. So really, obviously Saquon Barkley is a very highly scrutinized player. He's got a lot of pressure on him, former number 2 overall pick. He's like what, Garrett Cole is to the Yankees, what Jacob deGrom is to the Mets. He's the face of the team, one of the faces of the city, and really the piece was just about how his relationship with Brian Daboll and them teaming up, how Brian Daboll could really be perfect for Saquon and what he needs. Certainly we all understand Saquon's entering a huge season with a lot of pressure on him specifically this season. And, that relationship of him with Brian Daboll could lead to a lot of success, I think, because, Brian Daboll's offense is definitely more spread out. It's, certainly Daboll doesn't have a reputation of a, run first coordinator, but that's not a bad thing for Saquon. In fact, I think that'll be a really good thing because I think situationally Saquon will be in better positions and will be put in better spots to be able to have a lot more success than maybe we've seen the last few years. And certainly he needs it. So really the piece was just kind of about how I think this year he could really be well positioned for success working with that new, head coach and offensive, play caller.
Yeah, I found it interesting because I was able to attend several of the off-season workouts, and obviously, it's spring and they're in shorts and t-shirts, and they're not going to give away everything about what their offense is going to be. But you could see very, very clearly that this wasn't the sort of static Joe Judge, Jason Garrett, Freddie Kitchens offense. This was a much more spread out, much more horizontal based, RPO based, quick game based offense where, it was 7-on-7s and all of that, but I think this offense is going to be passing based and it's going to be spread based. And I think you're right. I think that probably fits what Saquon Barkley does, better than what he's tried to do the past couple of years.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail right on the head there. I mean, I think, you watch the Bills the last few years under Brian Daboll, and yeah, they utilize the entire field. They really spread you out. A lot of 10 personnel, 4 receivers and basically, yeah, just a lot of spreading teams out and, not exactly the heavy, 12 personnel, 13 personnel offensive looks we've seen from the Giants a lot in recent years. And I think that, as you said, and I totally agree, and that's kind of what I highlighted as well. I think that is better for Saquon's run style. If obviously he's an enormously talented back, we all know that. I think he's at his best on the perimeter. He's not a between the tackles bruiser that I think is meant to have 25 to 30 carries a game and wear down a defense. That's not the type of runner he is. And I don't want to call him a finesse runner because I think that would probably be doing him a disservice, but I think again he is better on the perimeter where he can use that change of direction, that explosiveness, those unbelievable athletic qualities that he has, as opposed to kind of being inside the tackles, ground and pound type mentality. So, and I think you're going to see that under Brian Dable, and I think that that's again gonna put him in advantageous positions.
Yeah, it's interesting when it comes to Saquon. I call him a home run hitter. Not necessarily, as you said, he's not necessarily an inside the tackles kind of runner. He's 6'1" or whatever, 6 foot, 230 some pounds, but he doesn't want to lower his head or lower his shoulder and try to push that defensive tackle backwards for an extra yard. He wants to get out of that. He wants to get out of there. And I don't know, when you have watched him, it's almost hard to watch him run in the middle because he runs like he doesn't want to be in there. He runs like he's looking for an escape hatch. And
Yeah.
and I let me see if you agree with this as well. It has driven me crazy the last couple of years, and even sometimes with Pat Shurmur, to watch the Giants just simple handoff up the middle, one side of the center or the other. But I've often wondered if, well, this offensive line has been so bad that it's basically the only thing they feel like they can execute. I wonder if that's got something to do with it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that have definitely contributed to that. One of the things I mentioned in the piece is that, Saquon, the situation around him has been, just to put it bluntly, horrible, for a lot of different reasons. And I think this certainly is shaping up to be a much better situation. And, I think one very astute observation you pointed out, which I completely agree with, and this is one thing that we always, I always felt about Saquon on film is, he's a guy that he does always look to bounce runs outside, almost a little too much, in my opinion. Like, I think there are plays and there are times when a running back just needs to kind of keep within the tackles and get what's blocked, 3, 4, 5 yards, because on 1st and 10, if maybe the blocking isn't great, but you can still pick up 4 yards, that's a lot better than maybe trying to bounce it outside. Now you only get 1 yard. I mean, 2nd and 6 is a lot different than 2nd and 9 from a play calling standpoint. And so I think that's one weakness of Saquon's is sometimes he just needs to get what's blocked, but totally agree that at his core, he's a home run hitter and he's got all the athletic tools to do that. And certainly, Giants fans want to see him be that guy. And I think he can be that guy again.
Yeah, I'm actually so glad to hear you say that because I've said for years that for me, the one thing that I wish Saquon would learn, I remember watching Wayne Gallman run, a couple of years back, and Gallman doesn't have nearly the talent of Saquon, but Wayne Gallman, that last year he was with the Giants, he would get every inch possible out of every run. And the thing that has always driven me crazy about Saquon is a lot of times when you give him the ball, especially in between the tackles, he'll turn a 2 or 3 yard gain into a 2 yard loss. And that just puts your offense in a bad spot.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And yeah, exactly. I mean, it's, again, there are a lot of plays where you just need to get what's blocked and live to see another down, because exactly 2nd and 8 and 2nd and 12, boy, those 2nd and 12s, those 3rd and longs, they put a lot of stress on your offensive line, which, wouldn't you know it, that's been one of the weak points for the Giants. So no doubt, I think he needs to find that blend of taking what the defense gives him while also still maintaining that home run attitude at times. And I think that's when you're going to see him get back to being the back that, he ultimately was his rookie season, that electric, playmaker.
Do you think that guy is still there? I mean, I've wondered if he's still there. I wondered if maybe something close to that might still be there, maybe more what we saw in 2019 in his second year. I'm just curious what the expectation should be for Giants fans when it comes to Barkley.
Yeah, no, and it's a fair question. I do think that guy is still there. I think I mean, he still has all the traits and all the ability. I think one thing that's really hampered this guy's ability to consistently perform is just obviously the injuries. I mean, and not only when you have an injury during a season, but even coming back from an injury, I mean, that takes a huge mental toll on a player, and especially a running back when, you're pretty much getting hit every time you touch the ball. And, I think last year, to me, when you watch Saquon, you could see that. You could see that he wasn't completely comfortable. He didn't completely feel the free reign to kind of be himself. And I think not only Giants fans, but football fans, I mean, we want to see Saquon return to being that guy. And I think he can be, as long as he's cleared that mental hurdle.
What's your guess on his future in New York? And obviously, I mean, you're not part of the organization anymore, so this is just an outside perspective. And because he's in his fifth year option. I mean, what do you think is the long-term future, for Saquon with the Giants?
Yeah, I think, ultimately, I think he is a guy that after this year, he's not going to be a Giant. And the reason I feel that way is with Brian Dable and Joe Shane coming from Buffalo. To me, they didn't place a great emphasis on the running back position, and which I think is smart, from a team building standpoint. I think the running back position, especially when you've got an offense that is spread out, that's kind of pass heavy. I think there are a lot of different guys at that running back spot that can get the job done. I think you can kind of mix and match skill sets. I think you can, I do agree. I think you can find backs in the mid to late rounds that'll do the job. And ultimately, and it's not that Saquon wouldn't make a huge difference for the Giants moving forward. I think he would, but it's just a matter of what you're going to have to pay him versus what you can find in the draft, what you can find, for pretty cheap dollar in free agency, and that's ultimately the balance. And I just ultimately feel like this new regime that's in there, they're gonna kind of stray away from paying a running back as opposed to doing it, even as great of a talent as Saquon is.
Sure, it's about resource allocation, and I think that Joe Shane, just even in some of the draft choices that he's made and some of the free agent decisions he made this offseason, I think that he's shown maybe I want to say a more modern approach when it comes to what everybody calls positional value. And it's not just on-field positional value, it's also monetary value in terms of the salary cap, in terms of if you're paying over average at a position like running back, that means maybe you have to pay undervalue at a position like corner. So I think he's shown, that he pays attention to those things more than maybe Dave did. Dave was a guy who just looked at talent and said, I want that guy.
Yeah. No, and I think, I think we all have an opinion, whether you're on the inside or you're not, you're scout, coach, fan, whatever. I think we all have an opinion about, if philosophically should you pay a running back, paying a running back. I mean, that's a big debate. And, my personal opinion, I don't think paying running backs is really ever a smart thing. I think unless it is quite literally Derrick Henry, who's proven that he can handle a ridiculous workload year after year and stay healthy.
Right.
But I think, a guy like Saquon, I mean, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but he's had so many injuries that even if he goes out this year, he plays 16, 17 games, can you rely on him to be healthy moving forward? Right. And I just don't know that you can. And so I think, again, there's a lot of opinions when it comes to whether you should pay a running back. And ultimately, we're going to see how, the Giants' new regime, feels moving forward.
All right, Tom, let's talk about another topic. And, this one's a little bit close to you, having been in the Giants front office for, I believe it was 3 years, correct? 3 years that you were
Correct.
A scouting assistant with the Giants. And there's been talk about the Mara family and the involvement of the Mara family and how involved they were in football decisions and all. There's been a lot of talk about that, especially prior to Joe Shane becoming GM. And the news broke recently that Chris Mara is no longer technically part of the Giants front office. He's still got an ownership stake, but his title is now senior personnel consultant rather than senior vice president of player personnel. And maybe it's semantics, maybe it's not, but he no longer shows up in the personnel department, listing when you look on Giants.com. just your thoughts on that whole move on Chris Mara, maybe on how much involvement he had, whether this is just, bookkeeping, just your thoughts on that whole scenario.
Yeah, well, obviously, that's something that's come under scrutiny a lot, not only over the last few years, but especially over the last, 7, 8 months, as the performance of the team in the front office has obviously not been good. I think as far as Chris's involvement when I was there, certainly there's only a select amount of people kind of in that circle of trust. And ultimately, if you're not in that circle of trust, there are a lot of things that ultimately you don't have the most exposure to. From certainly my knowledge, Chris was not super involved in a lot of the day-to-day stuff. Now, how many conversations he had with John Mara and others, certainly those things might have gone on, but certainly in the day-to-day, it wasn't something where he was involved a great deal. Now, Tim McDonald, on the other hand, is very involved in pretty much absolutely everything that goes on, but as far as Chris Mara, not someone that was, super present in the day-to-day personnel operations per se.
So you look at this as more just sort of bookkeeping or something that's symbolic, the sort of change in title for him.
Ultimately, I do. Yes, I think I'm not sure that his role in house will actually change from what it was. I think it is more of a bookkeeping type thing. Yes.
Sure. So, hey, let's talk about this. We've got training camp coming up in roughly 3 weeks now. Um, Looking ahead to that, I'm just curious if there are a couple of position battles, a couple of things that you're really looking forward to when it comes to camp when we get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one thing that always excites me with any team in training camp is watching the rookies, watching how they develop, watching how they pick everything up, especially this year with, two highly touted players like Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibodeau. I think that's going to be really exciting to watch them develop, progress, hopefully, obviously get healthy and stay healthy. So I think the rookies would be my biggest thing, but, also just kind of continuing to, talk about what we talked about earlier with Saquon, but, him and Daniel Jones, I mean, these are just massively important years for their careers, and
Mm-hmm.
they're just huge for both of them. And so certainly you hope for obviously good health for them too, but really just a good solid camp that has them feeling good going into the year. So I mean, those guys are really under the microscope big time. So it would be those two as well as the rookie class.
Sure. Since you went to Daniel Jones, I have been asked, and I get asked what I simply call the Daniel Jones question. I do a mailbag every week, and I get asked the Daniel Jones question in a bunch of different ways every single week. And basically, what it comes down to is Daniel Jones going to be the quarterback of the Giants beyond the 2022 season? And I always say, look, it's entirely possible. He was the 6th overall pick. He hasn't had great surroundings, all of that. We know what the situation's been, but you've got a new GM, you've got a new head coach, and historically those guys want their own guy. So I've always said, yeah, it's possible, but I think odds are against it. I think odds are that if he's competent, if he's average, to me, odds are, unless he's tremendous, that the Giants move on and look somewhere else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Ed, it's funny because I wrote a piece on that, pretty much that exact, concept and idea back in March for the 33rd team as well. I mean, really, it is truly quite a conundrum that the Giants find themselves in. Daniel Jones is one of those guys where, he is so highly thought of by so many coaches and scouts and big time evaluators around the league. I mean, he's really a well-respected player in league circles, but we all can't deny, just a lot of the inconsistencies and frustrating performances that he's had over the last few years. And I mean, he's just such a polarizing player. I mean, that's another player. Everybody has an opinion on Daniel Jones, and the spectrum of opinions on him is so wide ranging. And ultimately, yeah, I think this season is going to be huge watching him play with with Brian Dable, seeing how that relationship plays out. And ultimately, yeah, I think when, when this regime, when they look to the future, I mean, they have to make a very key decision. Can Daniel Jones be our guy? Can we win a Super Bowl with Daniel Jones? That's ultimately the question that you have to ask, I think, when finding for and evaluating a potential franchise quarterback, is if everything is right, can we win a Super Bowl with this guy? And so, yeah, it's a really, really tough situation, and, a lot of pressure on DJ this year for sure.
Yeah, it's a tough one because you can, especially if he plays if he doesn't play in a fashion that makes it obvious what the Giants should do. If he's somewhere in the middle, like, oh, we can win 10 games with this guy, but can we go deep in the playoffs? So it's hard. And I guess what that leads me to is I looked at quarterbacks drafted in the first round over maybe a 10-year period. And if you're judging quarterbacks by the idea that, okay, if you want to put him in the top tier, he's a Pro Bowl guy, he's an all-pro guy, he's a guy that wins playoff games. I think that even guys drafted in the first round, I think the NFL success rate is like 30% in drafting those guys. And I'm just curious for your thoughts on why it's so darn hard to evaluate quarterbacks and for NFL teams to draft and develop quarterbacks and get these guys in places where they can succeed.
Yeah, well, that's a long discussion, and there's a lot of layers and levels to that discussion. I mean, I think it's not only obviously the player skill set, their intangibles, but the situation that they come into, and then the player development program, the strength training program that's in place in that building. I mean, there's just all kinds of facets that affect a quarterback's development positively or negatively. And certainly when relating it back to Daniel Jones, I mean, that's one thing that unfortunately has really hurt his development, is that the situation around him just has not been good, and he's another guy that struggled to stay healthy. And another thing that's going to muddy the water, and it's kind of muddied the water the last few years on the evaluation of Daniel Jones is, let's say this year, let's say he goes out and plays the first 8 games, looks pretty good, but then he gets injured. And then he only ends up playing, 1 or 2 more games the rest of the season. I mean, then you're in a position where, the film he's put out there is really good, but again, he struggled to stay healthy, and you couldn't get that clear evaluation. And I think injuries the last few years with him has made the evaluation a little bit more difficult of him. And so that's something, again, that is just adds to the conundrum that, the Giants find themselves in.
Another guy that I not necessarily argue with fans about, but I know a lot of Giants fans disagree with me. We always talk about, at this time of year, we're heading into training camp, and we talk about what bubble players, guys who might, veteran players who might make the roster, who might not make the roster. I have Darius Slayton sitting firmly on the Giants roster bubble. I think you look at Darius Slayton, who, because of the proven performance escalators, is going to make $2.54 million in 2022. I look at Slayton, because he doesn't play special teams, as a very replaceable part on this Giants roster. And I'm just curious if you agree with me that there's a pretty decent chance that he might not be on the roster at all.
Yeah, I do think there's maybe even better than a decent chance, a good chance. And any player that's on any type of roster bubble, they have to contribute on special teams. Like if you are on the roster bubble, you have got to be a factor on special teams, or else your chances are greatly affected. That's just the reality. Unless you have proven yourself as a must-keep position player, from the line of scrimmage, the special teams value is huge. And with Darius, besides some kick return stuff over the years, it hasn't been there. And ultimately, he's a guy with 4.4 speed, but we haven't seen that really play out in special teams the way that you would hope, with being a gunner, stuff like that. So yeah, I think his lack of special teams is absolutely going to be a huge negative for him. He's one of those guys where he's got to show out in camp from the line of scrimmage. And if he doesn't, he could really be in serious trouble, in my opinion.
Yeah, I look at Darius and I like him. I think he's got talent, but on paper, when you look at it, he's wide receiver 5. If he can't help cover a punt or cover a kickoff, it's hard to keep him on the roster.
Yeah, and he's really a player. One thing that happens all across the league during training camp is, he's a player that you might look to flip for maybe another player at a position where maybe you're thin. You're looking at teams across the league and teams that are light at receiver, or maybe they're, they have some injuries early on in camp. They need another body at receiver. If they value Slayton highly, he's a player that you again could look to trade for a player at a position that maybe the Giants are a little weak at. So I would keep an eye out for that as well. And the biggest thing with a new head coach and a new GM coming in is, they have no affiliation or no loyalty to Darius Slayton. He's not one of their guys per se. I mean, he is on a totally fresh slate and he has to reprove himself. And ultimately, he's got to do a lot to make the roster, I think, because of that, because it's, a new regime coming in.
Right. Yeah, that's one of those things you talk about, new regimes coming in, and sometimes I think that, is it possible that sometimes these teams, that some of the roster changeover that gets made is just because, well, that wasn't my guy, I want this other guy, um is it possible that some of that changeover maybe that we see in these rosters maybe isn't really necessary? It's just because, well, that's the former GM's guy and I want to go ahead with my guys.
Yeah, certainly, I'd like to say that all decisions regarding a roster are strictly about the best 53, but a lot of times that isn't the case, unfortunately. Yeah, there certainly is some element of, hey, that's his guy or that's my guy, or he's got familiarity with the coaching staff, even if he maybe hasn't earned a spot. So that stuff definitely is a factor when it comes to roster, decisions. As much as you wish that it wasn't, it definitely is.
I think everybody's a human being and everybody likes familiarity and people that they know, and people whose work habits they trust and things like that. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, no, definitely, absolutely. As well as, I think to me, like when you're looking at undrafted free agents, and young guys, I mean, you're trying to also chart their upside. Is it
Mm-hmm.
is it worth keeping them, this season, even though it might pretty much just be a redshirt year for them, but we think this player has upside, so that's another thing you're also measuring as well. And there's ultimately a lot of different factors at play when you talk about trimming a roster down to 53.
I don't know if I asked you this the last time I had you on, but let's, as we look forward to training camp, let's kind of close up with this really. We've been through the Shermer era with the Giants and the McAdoo era, and then the era with Joe Judge. And every time you start over, everybody's optimistic and everybody wants to feel good about it. And I was as fired up as everybody else was when I heard Joe Judge's, introductory speech at his first press conference. Would you, at this point, would you say that it's okay for Giants fans to be optimistic about what they've seen so far, about maybe this regime finally being the one to get them pointed back in the right direction, or would you just say, hang tight, have patience, and see what happens?
Yeah, I think it's definitely. I think the decisions that the front office has made. I think there is a lot to be encouraged about as far as really building a team, the right way moving forward. So I definitely do think that there is optimism that's warranted. But in my opinion, we'll really find out how things are when you start losing games. And that's the case with any team around the league, and not just the Giants. I mean, any team, any franchise, like when you start going out there every Sunday and you start losing games and you lose 3 straight, you lose 4 straight, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of, there's injuries, there's adversity, that's when you find out, who's for real and who isn't, because the NFL season, it's a grind, it's a long year. And again, when that adversity hits, how is a team, how is a regime going to handle it? And ultimately, I think the ones that are successful when there's adversity, it truly is just kind of a blip on the radar. But other teams, it's a struggle to get out of it, and it just spirals downhill from there. So you won't really know that question until things start going a little bit south, and we see how, this team and this regime ultimately can handle it and recover.
It's interesting because we were talking about that during OTAs. I was talking about that with some of the other reporters because Brian Daboll is the friendliest guy on the planet. Brian Daboll comes to press conferences and he's always got a joke. He's always got, a nice remark. He's always got some sort of interaction with media members that I'm not used to be honest with you. I've been doing this for 15 years now, and I'm not used to some of the interpersonal stuff that goes on with Daboll and Joe Shane and the media that I haven't seen before. I would never have seen with Tom Coughlin, and I would have never seen with Joe Judge. But I wonder if that's going to be there when they're 0-3. That's what
Yeah.
I've said. Are they going to be so nice when they're 0-3?
Yeah, and I think once you get in season, consistency is key. A consistent message, the same message every week. Again, being consistent in what you do, because yeah, I mean it's all sunshine and roses right now, and you hear nothing but great things right now because everyone's 0-0. And then you play football week 1. You got half the teams in the league that are 0-1. You got half of them that are 1-0, and all those 0-1 teams are under scrutiny because they just lost. And it's just you got to be consistent. It's a long season. There's ebbs and flows, and I just feel like it's obviously, the teams that can kind of ride those the best and handle those the best ultimately are the ones that end up winning. And I know that's an obvious statement, but I think it's really, it's really true when you break it down like that.
Yeah, and the only other thing that I'll say is that Giants fans are tired of hearing, have some patience. It's a rebuild. It's going to take time, all of that. But for me, it feels like the first time in a while that Joe Shane, Brian Daboll, this organization, John Mara, to an extent, although John wants to win and he wants to win yesterday, it feels like the first time they've looked at it and said, we can't fix this in 1 year. It's going to take some time. There's not a Band-Aid that's going to make us a playoff team tomorrow. And I think to me this year, you're not looking for 11 wins. You're just looking for something that's not 4 wins and something that makes you feel like they're going forward. Did that feel accurate to you?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I think one thing that I think all fans can appreciate is kind of an honest approach from a front office. And, you're never going to get the complete honest truth view from an owner or a general manager. But I think that honesty, is something that fans really welcome, and that understanding that, yeah, it's going to take, at least a couple years probably. But yeah, I think you just want to see this team make improvement. You want to see them show strides. You want to see them have life. You want to see them compete. You want to see them fight in the fourth quarter when they're trailing. You just want to see a football team with life and with energy and with juice and improving. And if you see those things, those things often result in wins. So you see those things, you might see kind of the Giants outperform maybe their expected win total.
All right. Hey, Tom, I appreciate your spending the time. Just, remind folks where they can find you on social media, where they can find your work before I let you go.
Yeah, so you can find my work at the 33rd team on their website, and then on Twitter at TRudy831.
All right, Tom, thanks again. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please remember to take care of each other out there, stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.